Trade Master Zibsar of the Keth Mercantile Consortium had attended many illegal establishments in his 37 years of navigating the galaxy's shadow economy. He had browsed markets where sentient beings were sold like cargo, sat in auction houses where entire planetary mineral rights changed hands through bribery and forgery, and once attended a private dinner on Vel Secundus where the appetizers were technically a war crime. He was not, by any reasonable definition, a squeamish creature. But even Zibsar had to admit, as his private skiff descended toward the hollow asteroid designated only as waypoint null on the navigation charts, that what he was attending tonight operated in a category of its own. He wasn't here for the spectacle. He needed to be very clear about that, at least to himself. He was here for the data, for the faces, for the list. The Galactic Council's 47 senior delegates were, by charter, incorruptible pillars of interstellar civilization. They adjudicated wars. They governed trade routes. They decided which species were granted protected status and which were deemed too primitive to matter. Every 3 standard years, Zibsar's consortium paid them an enormous sum in routing fees, tariff adjustments, and what the accounting department politely called relationship maintenance costs. Tonight, if his intelligence was correct, 11 of those delegates would be in the audience. Zibsar touched the micro-recorder woven into his collar and smiled with 2 of his 4 mouths. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The facility's interior was designed to feel expensive, which it achieved through the reliable combination of dim lighting and extreme brutality. The arena itself was a circular pit, perhaps 40 meters across, carved from the asteroid's raw nickel iron. Elegant viewing platforms ringed it at 3 levels, each equipped with privacy screens that could be raised or lowered at will. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, expensive stimulant vapors, and something older, something that made the glands along Zibsar's neck ridge contract involuntarily. Fear, concentrated and recent. He found his seat, a premium box on the 2nd tier, secured through 6 layers of anonymous intermediaries, and accepted a glass of chilled Valyrian blue from a silent attendant whose eyes did not meet his. He noted the attendant's collar, a slave band, archaic by current standards. Someone here appreciated theater. The other boxes were filling. Zibsar kept his expression neutral and let his secondary eyes, the pair most beings didn't notice, work the room. There, a Thraxian in a ceremonial robe with the wrong insignia for his stated rank, which meant he was either an impersonator or a delegate hiding his actual status. There, 2 Savari who kept touching their rings in the synchronized pattern of old family bonding, their faces doing the careful blankness of beings who desperately wished to be unrecognized. And there, in the most expensive box, curtained in shielded privacy glass, just transparent enough to hint at occupancy, 3 silhouettes that Zibsar's intelligence files had spent 8 months trying to locate. He pressed his recorder twice. Active. Excellent. The announcer's voice filled the arena in 7 languages simultaneously. Zibsar tuned out the words and focused on the pit below. 2 holding gates opposite each other. Standard predator versus prey configuration. Nothing he hadn't seen before, in more desperate corners of the galaxy. Then the first gate opened, and Zibsar forgot, briefly, about his recording. The Dorix had been described in Galactic Survey reports as an apex ambush predator of indeterminate social complexity, exhibiting territorial aggression incompatible with controlled environments. This was the kind of language xenobiologists used when they meant, "We do not fully understand this creature. It has killed everyone who tried to study it closely, and we consider this matter closed." Zibsar had reviewed footage. He had thought himself prepared. The reality of a Dorix in an enclosed space was something the footage had not adequately communicated. It was large, larger than he'd expected, nearly 3 meters at the shoulder, but size was not the unsettling thing. Many predators were large. The unsettling thing was the way it moved. Or rather, the way it didn't move. It entered the arena and simply stopped. And in stopping, it became more present, not less. Its 4 eyes, 2 forward-facing for depth, 2 lateral for panoramic threat assessment, swept the space with the systematic patience of something that had never once, in its evolutionary history, needed to hurry. The crowd shifted. Nervous excitement. The sound of expensive beverages being sipped. The second gate opened. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The human walked in, as if he'd been shown to a table at a restaurant he'd heard mixed reviews about. He was unremarkable in the way that humans often were to alien eyes. Bipedal, bilaterally symmetrical, distressingly fragile-looking, roughly 1.8 meters, with a particular combination of features that most species found somewhere between unsettling and forgettable. He was wearing the gray coverall of a transit prisoner, standard issue for beings processed through the outer system holding facilities where questions were discouraged. He looked at the Dorix. The Dorix looked at him. The crowd waited for the running to begin. The human sat down. Not crouched, not collapsed, sat. Deliberately, cross-legged, on the floor of the arena, with the careful, deliberate motion of someone choosing a comfortable position for an extended conversation. He placed his hands on his knees. He looked at the Dorix with an expression that Zibsar, who had spent considerable professional effort learning to read the faces of beings he wanted to manipulate, could only describe as patient. The crowd made confused sounds. Somewhere, someone laughed nervously. Then the human opened his mouth. What came out was not a scream. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The Dorix language had no written form. This was not because Dorix were unintelligent. The survey reports had quietly acknowledged, in footnotes that received little attention, that Dorix problem-solving metrics exceeded most council species, but because Dorix communication operated in ranges and registers that standard recording equipment consistently failed to capture fully. It was subvocal and supravocal simultaneously. It involved resonance frequencies that could be felt in bone. It was the one xenolinguist who had survived extended Dorix contact, described before her retirement from field work, like trying to transcribe thunder. The human spoke it, not fluently. Zibsar would learn later that fluency was the wrong concept, that human vocal architecture could approximate perhaps 60% of Dorix phonemic range through a combination of chest resonance, nasal cavity shaping, and what human linguists apparently called creative abuse of the soft palate, but recognizably. Meaningfully, the Dorix went absolutely still. In the boxes above, several beings leaned forward. Several others leaned back. Zibsar did neither. He was watching the Dorix's lateral eyes, which had stopped their systematic sweep and fixed, both of them, on the small, sitting human. The human spoke again. Longer this time. There was a rising quality at the end, a question or what served as one in that language. The vibration of it reached Zibsar's seat through the arena floor, a faint hum in the metal. The Dorix answered. The crowd erupted in confusion and an undercurrent of real fear. This wasn't in the program. The program involved pursuit, and then screaming, and then the discreet lowering of privacy screens for those who preferred not to watch the conclusion but wished to feel they'd been present for the spectacle. The program did not involve the predator sitting down as well, folding its 6 limbs beneath its body with the patient deliberateness of a being settling in for a long talk. Back and forth, the human's voice, thin and strange, attempting harmonics it wasn't built for. The Dorix's response felt more than heard. Back and forth. Zibsar pressed his recorder again. He wasn't sure what he was capturing. He was not sure it mattered. Something was happening that he hadn't planned for, and Master Zibsar had not reached his current position by ignoring things he hadn't planned for. Then the human nodded, once with the particular gravity of a being who has just made a deal, and stood up. He pointed at the ventilation grate in the arena's north wall. It was approximately 60 centimeters square. The Dorix made a sound that collapsed the ventilation grate from its housing. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The screaming started approximately 4 minutes later. Not from the arena. The arena was empty. From the corridors. Zibsar was already moving. He had not survived 3 decades of the galaxy's shadow economy by being slow to recognize the moment when an information-gathering operation became an escape situation. He was through his box's private exit before the first security alert sounded, moving fast through the service corridor that ran behind the premium viewing level, heading for the docking bay where his skiff waited. The screaming behind him grew complex. Multiple voices. Multiple species. the specific register of beings who had come to watch suffering and were now encountering it from the other direction. He did not let himself think about what was happening. He focused on the corridor ahead, on the route memorized before arrival, on the simple geometry of getting from his current position to his ship. Gunfire. The facility had security. Of course it had security. It housed a Dorix. But security designed to prevent a captive predator from escaping was very differently configured from security designed to stop a coordinated attack, moving through a ventilation system with perfect knowledge of the facility's layout, guided by a being who had memorized every route and flaw in the structure during the long months of its captivity. Zibsar rounded a corner and stopped. The corridor ahead was blocked. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The human stood in the center of the passageway. He had found, somewhere in his transit through the facility's infrastructure, a security officer's sidearm and a facility map. He held the former loosely, not pointed at Zibsar, and had apparently memorized and discarded the latter. His gray coverall was torn at one shoulder. He was otherwise unhurt, which Zibsar was finding increasingly unsurprising. Behind the human, at the edge of the corridor's light, the Dorix sat in the darkness and watched with four patient eyes. Trade Master Zibsar. The human's voice was calm. It was the voice of a being who had moved past all the stages of their situation that involved uncertainty. Keth Mercantile Consortium. Registered through 4 shell entities to avoid council trading disclosure requirements. You weren't here for the entertainment. It was not a question. Zibsar spread his hands in the universal gesture of non-threat. I was here for information. I'm a businessman. Whatever you think I know exactly what you are. Still calm. Still that unsettling patience. I've been in that holding cell for 6 months. Do you know how many people came through? Inspectors, buyers, security assessors, entertainers. Do you know how many of them ever looked at me and saw someone who might be memorizing their faces? A slight pause. They thought I was frightened. Frightened things don't pay attention. That's a consistent mistake beings make about humans. Zibsar's secondary eyes flicked to the Dorix. The Dorix did not move. You're going to want to keep looking at me, the human said. We've had this conversation about what eye contact means to my friend, and I'd hate for there to be a misunderstanding. Zibsar returned his gaze to the human. I can offer you, he began. You have a recorder in your collar. Active for the last 42 minutes, since before the gates opened. The human tilted his head. I want it. All of it. Original file, uncompressed. And then I want the names in your intelligence files. The full list of people your consortium has been quietly noting as potential leverage, not just tonight's attendees. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere behind Zibsar, distant but approaching, the sounds of the facility's ongoing catastrophe continued. And if I cooperate, Zibsar said carefully, you let me leave. The human looked at him for a long moment, then at the Dorix. Some communication passed between them that Zibsar could not follow. Not language, exactly, but the shorthand of beings who have made plans together. You misunderstand the situation, the human said. I'm not bargaining. The recorder and the files are things you're going to give me, because the alternative is that my colleague here makes a decision I can't take back, and despite everything, I'd rather not. He paused. But you leaving, that's also part of the plan. You're going to leave, and you're going to be seen leaving, and the people who need to know that someone was here collecting evidence tonight are going to know it. That's your role. Not victim. Messenger. Zibsar stared at him. You planned this, he said. It came out with more wonder than he intended. You planned for there to be a witness. You planned for the witness to escape. The human smiled for the first time. It did not make him look friendlier. We had 6 months. A lot of long conversations about planning. He gestured at the Dorix, and something in the gesture held a warmth that Zibsar found, for reasons he couldn't immediately name, more unsettling than anything else in the evening. My colleague is extraordinarily good at game theory, the human added. Once we established a shared language, the planning went quickly. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Zibsar's skiff broke from the asteroid's shadow 39 minutes later with 2 things it hadn't arrived with. A burning conviction that he needed new accounting for how he thought about risk, in a data package that he spent the 17-hour transit back to Keth space turning over in his hands, trying to decide what to do with it. In the end, he did something he'd never done in 37 years of professional navigation of the galaxy's moral gray zones. He transmitted it, unedited and with his own face clearly attached, to the Council's Independent Oversight Bureau. Not out of conscience, Zibsar was realistic about what he was, but because the human had been absolutely right about his role, and because there were 11 delegates in those boxes whose names were on that recording, and because the thing that separated competent information brokers from dead ones was understanding which way the wind was shifting before it shifted. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened 9 standard days later. The 11 delegates resigned before formal charges were filed, which was the galaxy's oldest method of making prosecutions technically complicated. It worked to a degree. It always worked to a degree. But this time, there was also the matter of Waypoint Null itself, which had been comprehensively destroyed from the inside, and the question of how, and the security assessment that kept returning to the same impossible conclusion. A coordinated, intelligent, two-being strike team operating without external support, using facility infrastructure in ways that should have required months of engineering study to understand. Except that one of them had had 6 months, and the other had the cognitive architecture of an apex predator who had survived by understanding, with total clarity, every environment they were ever placed in. The Council filed an official report classifying the incident as unexplained catastrophic failure. The Council always filed that report. It was what the Council did with things it couldn't explain without incriminating itself. But the questions didn't stop. Questions never stopped once they'd been started by the right event, in front of the right witnesses. In the holding cells of 3 separate Council-adjacent detention facilities, places where beings were kept in legal limbo, in preparation for entertainment that those facilities would now never provide, there were others who had watched the same news feeds as everyone else. Others who had heard the same impossible account of 2 beings who should have died and instead decided not to. Others who began, quietly, to pay attention in new ways, to memorize faces, to observe schedules, to learn the language of the beings around them, to have long, patient conversations with the predator in the next enclosure, through the wall, in the deep resonance frequencies that the facility's recording equipment consistently failed to capture. To plan. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In the final accounting, which took 7 years and 4 separate oversight investigations, and ultimately resulted in what historians would call the third reformation of the Galactic Council's ethics charter. The incident at Waypoint Null was listed as the inciting event. The report mentioned, in brief, the roles of 11 unnamed council delegates who resigned under pressure, and one trade Master Zibsar of the Keth Mercantile Consortium, whose testimony and recordings formed the evidentiary foundation of the entire investigation. It did not mention the human. Humans were still, officially, a Class 4 developing species, legally absent from political proceedings they were deemed too primitive to have standing in. It mentioned the Dorix only in a brief notation that one individual of that species had been among those present at the facility and had escaped into unmonitored space, and that search efforts had been discontinued as impractical given the species' documented difficulty in containment. The xenolinguist who had filed the survey report, the one who had survived extended Dorix contact and retired from field work, read this notation in the published document and sat very quietly for a long time. Then she transmitted a message to a research contact at the Human Diplomatic Liaison Office, which was a newly created institution of uncertain official status and significant actual influence. It read, "I believe there are some conversations that need to happen. I believe the right person to mediate them already has the necessary language skills. Please advise on availability." The response came back in 4 hours. It said, "He's available. He says to tell you. He's been expecting your message. He and his colleague have been expecting it for some time." And then, because humans apparently couldn't help themselves, even in official diplomatic correspondence, P.S. the Dorix says hello, or the closest available approximation. It's more of a subharmonic acknowledgement, really. The translation is ongoing.